I know that you and I have kind of coexisted in similar spaces. We're familiar with dominant forms of discourse, right? And I feel like a lot of what we witness and we're living through right now comes with a very specific power analysis that almost hinges on stressing how those of us who are questing for justice or demanding justice lack in power, right? So it feels like when somebody comes in, somebody like you comes in and says, and invites people to relinquish their powerlessness, it doesn't seem like all that is being relinquished is powerlessness. It seems like people have to let go of a story that has become really important to their identity and their social location in the struggle for justice. So how do you grapple with what I often experience as an attachment to powerlessness? How do you talk about that in the book, or how do you grapple with it?
Yeah, I mean, I say really clearly in the first few chapters that it's more important to, while it's important to understand how you're made powerless by a system, it's even more important to know what your power is. And that whatever you do, your energy, your focus, your attention is the highest resource that you have. So it is I think of it as the currency with which you purchase your life.
Yes.
So you can use your attention while you can always replenish it with food. And a lot of what we do as humans is really to fuel ourselves, to give attention to something or other. So our attention is something that we have to constantly build. And it's really important. And once I realized how important it was, I mean, I've been playing with this for many years. And I really started off as like an open-minded skeptic, like running across ideas about you can create what you want and be focused and all that. And I would just say, well, okay, sure. Like I'll try that. And I want this, And I would kind of set out some quest to the universe that was like somewhat outside of my reach. I love playing with things that are right outside of the reach. And then it would always happen. I would always get it over decades. And so I kind of, I think there's a discipline that comes in being able to direct your attention to the right things, to the things that you want to create and see. It takes a lot of discipline. And what I've learned, it takes discipline to be free. It's not the people that are orienting to it from a place of powerlessness. I think there's a little bit of resisting the work that it takes, the discipline that it takes, the responsibility, your own accountability to your own freedom. I guess that's why I started with the definition of power in the book, right? Because there are different types of power, and I differentiate between dominant and liberatory power. But I think one of the ways that power works at its most basic is to assert your reality as if there is no other. That's one of the 7 patterns of dominant ways of interacting. And I talk about that in my book. And, when I first came across that framework by Roland Barthes, a postmodernist white man who actually started to see these dynamics and actually looked at it, he called it white supremacist consciousness or something. But it really is a consciousness that anybody can embody. It's a dominant consciousness that appears natural, right? So things like asserting your reality as if there is no other. And I think that's, in my book, I tried to get to the underlayer, because I think the ideology right now around the different isms, like classism, sexism, ableism, I mean, that's a thing. It's a certain level of reality. And there's a reason why people want to understand that. Oftentimes people don't. They don't understand the forces that buffet them. I spent many years of my life studying that. But you don't solve the problem at the level at which it was created. So I haven't seen a lot of change with that understanding. It serves a purpose, perhaps. But for me, it's really like, okay, that's a really high bar for everyone to be able to know how to interact with each other, like always perfectly and ideally in super egalitarian manner, right? Like one of the things I learned from really studying what I wanted out of the world in this sort of book around power was realizing that what we want from people is actually like super high bar. It's something that you have to be pretty developed as a person to be able to interact that way. So one of the things that struck me is what a high bar it is. And so then what does it mean to be doing this work, right? If that's the image that we have of what people should be doing or interacting with us. So, there's a lot, I mean, it's a developmental process, right? So I think for me, seeing the stages of it allows me to have some understanding of what I can do to talk to someone who might be in a totally different, phase of development around how they understand their power than somebody else might be. One of the most useful frameworks for that is I forget her name, but I talk about her in my book. She talks about how the 4 ways in which people orient around power and how it's developmental. And, from seeing power as external and something you have to get, all the way to the highest level being seeing power as outside of you, something that flows through you. So there's at the highest level, it isn't being able to command your life, it's being able to be open enough to flow with something that might be beyond what you can currently command.
Wow.
So yeah, once you see the spectrum, you have a lot of compassion for where people are, and you kind of can see it's fun. Those are worlds. Every interaction is a world. So being able to interact, I call it in the book successfully. Successful interactions between people, to me, are the the locus of change. They're the thing that we have control over.
Right.
These things. What I learned about the NHS experience is how disadvantageous it is to think about things as systems. Because people don't see themselves in systems. It's not a human concept.
Right.
And so when you say to people, well, you create the system, they don't really get that, you know? So I found from walking away from that, then we brought it down to the personal level and interactions, and people could see how much impact that had. And they were like, yeah, there was this guy the other day who walked around the office saying hello to everyone, and it just changed the whole dynamic. And I said, yeah, imagine it all, you guys were doing that. And so people started to realize how much power they had. And it was only through their personal choice that they understood how the system, they were like, oh, So I think, the language, I've been getting really into more using language around personal
That's great.
Positioning.
That really resonates. We often say when it comes to story, right? It's easier to tell a story that we can go from the personal to the universal, but we can't go the other way around, right? And there's a great little film about design, and it draws this contrast between Brasilia. And Brasilia was designed.
Just read about that.
Brasilia is like modernity, right?
High modernity.
Right, and so when you fly over Brasilia, it's perfect, right? It's organized.
Just read about
right, but then they take it around against this square in Copenhagen, where what they do is they account for the fact that human beings tend to look down. Evolutionarily, more danger will come from down. You can see 10 feet in front of you and 10 feet to your periphery, and so they constructed this as according to that kind of basic individual or personal reality, and the square is vibrant. Well, Brasilia is known as a dysfunctional city, right? Because it's not organic, right? And it seems like what we're trying to do is fit everything into a box, organize everything by this kind of identity box, and this identity relates to this identity from this position, right? And so we have Operation Olympics, where if you are part of the most oppressed identity, then you're the person that should speak first, right? And so everything is trying to get structured in this very rational way to keep people from experiencing discomfort, which becomes really devoid of life, actually, right?
Well, it's so funny. This just shows how we're always in the same sort of resonating field. I've been reading James Scott, who's a professor at Yale, and he's, I think, an anthropologist who started studying societies and really quickly got into studying how power actually works. And I'm reading his current one called Seeing Like the State.
Wow.
And it's all about how the state, that's a way of seeing, right? Even designing buildings. I mean, there are these ways that, and this is why now I'm really shifting more towards culture and architect and sort of culture. Yeah, culture is that these ways of seeing actually matter, right? Like when you create from a worldview, so you can look down on something and see it all, and it makes sense from an aerial view. That's a dominant view, right? And that's exactly what he talks about. He talks about Brazil. He talks about different historical attempts to create that, including leftist ones, right? So I just finished reading last night about the Soviet, attempt. And in every instance, there was this plan that was created in a room separate from wherever this is supposed to get implemented by people who then made the actual realities fit that framework.
Right.
And it never did, but it changed what was there originally. So it's not like it always wins. It doesn't ever completely win, but it changes the communities that are there so that the communities that are there can be legible. He calls it legibility.
Wow.
So what I love about him is that he points out at a really systemic level the ways that we try to organize collectively, just like Roland Barthes does in Interpersonal, he identifies our tendencies towards planning that actually create these kind of spaces like Brasilia. One is this desire for legibility, to be able to see your empire and tax it and extract labor from it and extract whatever it is that the state extracts, because that's what the state does ultimately, right? So making something legible is one of them. The other thing is to immobilize it. So to make populations that are usually mobile, they can just go if they don't like what you're doing. I mean, the whole concept of last names apparently came about because of that. Deeds for homes, these are all ways that the state attempted to make its population and its resources legible.
Wow.
And it came from farming, from industrial agriculture replacing natural forests, you know. So these ways of seeing, there are like 2 or 3 things that replicate over time. You know, there's the standardization that comes with legibility. There's the immobility and the aggregating.
Wow.
So when you are trying to form a revolutionary government, if you're doing the same thing.
Right. Right.
So what actually is the tool of the people who resist is mobility.
Right.
Being hidden, not being transparent. And not being aggregate, being small neighborhoods and communities. So understanding like these structures at the super different level, right? That excites me.